Hey everyone! My name is Ryan and I'm back with another video. In today's video, I will be doing the frustrating book tag. And I wasn't tagged by anyone or anything, but I saw Megan from Megan's Reading Revelations do this, and I'll link her video down below, but I thought it was a fun tag and I just wanted to do it, so I'm doing it. The first question is to name a book that you thought would be 5 stars, but wasn't. And for me, this book definitely has to be Scythe by Neil Shusterman. This book is so popular here on BookTube, and I really do like Neil Shusterman's other series called Unwind. So when I saw that this series was popular on BookTube, and not only that, but was more popular than the series that I was familiar with by him, I thought that I would be like a shoo-in to love this book. But then I read it and it was just kind of okay. And since rereading the Unwind series last year, that one's actually kind of okay in my head now as well. So I think I might have just outgrown Neil Shusterman's writing. I thought that the world and the concept was interesting, but I thought that some of the main characters' motivations switched without much development really, and there was a lot of insta-love. In addition to that, I also just kind of felt like Neil Shusterman's writing is just really dry, and it wasn't as engaging as it really could have been for me. That being said, I definitely didn't hate the series. I just really don't want to continue. I will say that I liked the first book better than the second book, but I just didn't care enough to want to finish the series, so yeah, that's my answer. The next question is, what is a book that had a great beginning but an ending that let you down? And I actually have a couple answers for this. The first one is The Light Between Worlds by Laura E. Weymouth. And I was so freaking in love with the concept and with the first half of this book. This is essentially a book that's like, take like the Narnia kids, some kids that went away to some portal fantasy world and had a whole adventure and a whole life where they grew up in their fantasy world, and then they had to come back, and they came back and they were right where they left off. And this story was about them growing up again and having to readjust and dealing with the loss of that fantasy world. In a weird way, it really does remind me of the Wayward Children series, but I think the Wayward Children series has a lot more of a hopeful and whimsical tone to it. I think I would still recommend The Light Between Worlds. It's just the thing that got me was that we follow two different characters, and the switch in character doesn't shift until about halfway through the book. And the first character that we follow I thought was so engaging. She's kind of like the Lucy Pevensey type of character, where she was really young and youthful and hopeful when she went into the fantasy world, and now that she came back, she's the one that's really especially struggling with being in the real world again, and her thing was dealing with the trauma of it and the PTSD of it. And I also like that we got little snippets interspersed of what she went through in the fantasy world. I thought it was very interesting and very nicely woven together in with the stuff from the real world afterwards. The thing that I didn't like is that something happens about halfway through, and then we switch to her sister, who's a bit more of like the Susan Pevensey type of character, where she's a lot more rational, a lot more serious of a character. And not only were their personalities just so different that I kind of found it jarring, I also just really didn't like the outlook that the Susan character, I can't remember her name, but the way that she looked at her younger sister. I almost felt like she was looking at, you know, her sister's depression and her sister's PTSD and all of her trauma responses as a burden, and I didn't like it. My other answer for this has definitely got to be Nevernight by Jay Kristoff. This is a grimdark adult fantasy about a girl who goes to an assassin school and in hopes of achieving a revenge plot. I thought that the first chapter of this was so strong. It did a really good job of setting this up as a grim, gruesome, brutal story. But I think the thing that took me out of it is that the story does something a little bit different, where the narrative actually has footnotes on like a lot of the pages. And it wouldn't have been that much of a problem. It's just that I felt like there were just way too many. These footnotes were essentially responsible for a lot of the world building, setting up a lot of the mythology, things like that. And some of these footnotes would be like huge, giant, meaty paragraphs, and sometimes even extending on to multiple pages. And there would be these footnotes a lot, like points where I felt like there was a new one on every page, and I felt like it was taking me away from the actual story that was happening. And I felt like J. Kristoff was trying to almost do a dual timeline sort of thing with this, where, you know, you would be reading the footnotes and things from the footnotes and some of the history and the mythology and that type of thing would come up in the actual story. And it was happening so much, and they would go on for so long that it was honestly pretty distracting. And honestly, the more it went on, the more it started to become really annoying, and then I started getting annoyed with a lot of the characters and even just the story in general. So I was like, you know what, I'm done. So yeah, while I really loved the beginning, I was just tired of it by the end of it. And I do kind of want to go back to it on audiobook, but if I don't like it on audiobook, I'm just going to give up. The next question is, what is a book that has a pretty cover but with an ugly spine? And I don't actually have a full answer for this. A lot of the books that I have that have ugly spines just have ugly covers as well, so I'm just going to show those. So right here I have Daughter of Smoke and Bone by Laini Taylor. This is one of my favorite YA fantasies, and it just might be my least favorite cover on the planet. I mean, like, just look at it. Like, the font is ugly, the colors are ugly. Like, what is that picture doing? The spine is just the same thing. And honestly, it's really just a nuisance overall on my shelf. I really want to replace these with some newer editions. And the cover just does nothing to represent the story itself. And because this is one of my favorite series ever, it's really a shame. Question number 4 is, do you have a book series that doesn't match? And yes, the answer is definitely yes. I just brought out 2 of them just so you could see, but books 1, 2, and 4 of the Raven Cycle, I have the US paperback, but book 3 I actually got used off of thrift books, and I didn't realize when I bought it that I bought the UK edition, so this is the UK paperback. It actually used to be a lot worse because I used to have the US hardcover as well of the book 4, but eventually I got that replaced with the paperback. So now it's a little bit better than it used to be. Additionally, my edition of Radio Silence by Alice Oseman doesn't match the rest of my Alice Oseman paperbacks, which I don't really mind because, I mean, the UK edition of Radio Silence looks similar to this style. This is Loveless, but all of the UK editions kind of have this similar like doodly style, and the US paperback of Radio Silence looks like this, and even though it doesn't match, I actually like this cover better. I think this cover just represents the loneliness of the story better, and I just kind of think it's prettier. I like the night sky. And yeah, up here my heart stoppers don't match. It's not that noticeable, but my first volume is the US edition, and my second and third volumes are the UK edition, so the UK ones are taller. So yeah, ideally I like my series to match, but I'm not that picky about it. So yeah, I definitely do have some on here that don't match. Question number 5 is, what is a book from your youth that you've read but you can't remember the name and you can't find anywhere? And I really had to think about this because I've talked about this a lot, but as I've said before, my reading tastes were so specific as a kid. So I would read the same thing over and over again. So because of that, there's not a lot for me to really pull from. But I did think of something, and this is from the period when I tried to branch out, but this book scared me, so I gave up on branching out for a little bit. And that's just from my brief stint of reading the Goosebumps books. This is the only Goosebumps book that I ever read, and I don't remember which one it was, and every time I try to look it up, I can't even picture the cover, but I know it was one of the choose your own adventure ones, and I'm pretty sure it took place in a theme park. And the reason why it scared me so much is that on one of like the choose your own adventure like endings where you would end up like dead or whatever, and it was where like you as the main character were like disemboweled and disembodied and were like looking at your own organs in like pickle jars essentially in like a mad scientist lab. And honestly, that's really the only thing that I remember from it. But when I was a kid, I got so like squicked out by it that I just put down the book, didn't pick it up again, didn't pick up another Goosebumps book, and didn't try to branch out again for another couple of years. So yeah, I didn't have a good time. Question number 6 is, are there any books that you have read that you are certain that you've read, but you remember nothing about? And the answer to this is, holy crap, yes. I have such a weird memory where I remember the details of really specific books that I love, but the majority of the books just I completely forget. Like I remember it in the moment and maybe a couple of months after I read it, but as the years go on, I forget everything. But I was actually looking on my Goodreads to find a good answer for this, and I found a book called The In-Between Days by Vicky Wakefield. And I know I read this, and I know I was in school when I read it, and I remember the cover, but I can't tell you anything about it. I think there might have been a ghost in it, and I don't even remember the main character's name. I don't remember anything. Also, additionally, Six of Crows. I read this book in my first year of college, like kind of around the time that Crooked Kingdom came out, because I wanted to marathon them. And at the time, I read all the Shadow and Bone books and all the Six of Crows books, like back to back to back to back. And I think that was just a little bit too much for me, where I spent too much time in that world. So by the time I got to Six of Crows, I think I was a little bit burned out on the Grisha world and Leigh Bardugo's writing, so I just couldn't get into it. That being said, I actually do remember stuff from it. Like I remember the characters' names, and I remember that there was a heist. Don't know what the heist is about. And I know it takes place on Ketterdam, but I don't remember anything of the plot. I don't remember any quotes or anything like that. I don't remember any specific scenes. And honestly, the things that I do remember, I think I only remember because this book is so heavily talked about in every social media space when it comes to YA books. It's kind of like, you know, with Percy Jackson, even if you've never read it and you've never touched a Percy Jackson book, I think just from being online in the book space, you would still kind of know that he's the son of Poseidon. You know probably what Camp Half-Blood is. You know it probably has something to do with Greek mythology, and you probably know who Annabeth is. It's kind of the similar concept here. Question number 7 is, have you ever recommended a book to a friend and they started telling you all the things that they hated about it? And actually, I don't think that this has ever happened to me. This has definitely happened with albums and like music, but not books. At least not to my knowledge. Maybe they were just like hiding the fact that they didn't like it from me. But I feel like every time me and my friends have read the same thing, it's because we've just naturally had similar tastes. And the times when we've just had different tastes, we just don't read each other's books. So this hasn't really happened to me. Question number 8 is, what is your worst experience loaning out a book to someone? And I think I speak for a lot of book lovers here when I say that I've had several friends not give me the book back. You know, it starts out great. You loan out a book to someone and expect them to love it. And in my case, it's just because the friendship ends or you stop talking, and then you never get the book back. Somebody I knew in high school has my copy of The Song of Achilles still. I've narrowed it down to 3 people, but honestly, I don't even remember anymore who has it. I had a friend who has like 3 of my books, and then we stopped being friends, but it's okay because I think I have a couple of her books as well. But yeah, so thankfully no one that I know has ever damaged a book of mine, but I would like my books back. Question number 9 is, show me some of your impulse buys that you've never read. And I'm gonna be honest, a lot of my books that I buy are impulse buys. I never go into bookstores expecting to buy something specific, but I always come out with more than I intended to. But there are still some books that I feel like are more impulse buy than the rest of them, so I'm going to show you those. First up, I have Queens of Innis Lear by Tessa Gratton. This is an adult fantasy standalone that I believe is like a dark fantasy retelling of King Lear. I bought this right when it first came out, thinking that I was going to read it and love it, and I'm still confident that I'm going to love it, but I haven't touched it. It's been on my shelf for I think like 3 years at this point, and I just haven't touched it. There's also Little Women. I actually did intend to buy Little Women. I do actually want to read this. This is a relatively recent impulse buy for me. But as someone who doesn't typically read classics, especially ones that are not like fantasy oriented, did I need this special edition? No, but I bought it. And I think this one is the definition of an impulse buy. This is Blood Red Road by Moira Young, the first book in the Dustland series. Luckily, I bought this at a thrift store, so I didn't pay full price for it, but this is a YA dystopian. I haven't read a YA dystopian since I was in like my sophomore year of high school. Why did I buy this? I don't know. I still do plan on reading this just like for fun, but like I didn't need it. And the last question, question number 10, is how many unread books are there on your shelves? And I'm actually going to say my number because I'm proud of it, because it used to be a lot higher. I can remember a time in like high school or like early college when I think I'd actually broken over 200. So 64, which is what it is now, isn't that bad. Actually, at the end of 2020, I had it down even lower. I think I had it down to like the 30s or 40s, but I've done a lot of book buying in the past couple of months, so of course it shot right back up again, but honestly, in comparison to where I have been in the past, 64 isn't that bad. So yeah, that's it for the book tag. This was a lot of fun, and I'm not going to tag anybody specific, but if you see this and you want to do it, I think you should do it too. But that is all that I have for you today. Don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe, and don't forget to be a good person.